How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today, guys, we are going to be talking about, sorry, I had a cough, discretion. Discretion, guys, be honest with you, man. A lot of people don't realize the value of developed discretion in this profession, in corrections. And by the way, guys, as you move up, I mean, this is what the main dialogue is going to be. As you move up in your level of authority, the need for discretion, because you are going to be empowered to make decisions. And sometimes these decisions, they're not so easy. You know, there's going to be conflicts with what you need to do, with what policy says. And again, guys, and we're going to talk about this, when it comes to discretion, I'm not telling people to break away from policy. I want to get that right out there right now. It's just, this is how policy expands. So discretion is also very, very good when it comes to the growth of the agency. If we don't employ discretion, then the agency, even ourselves, our personal growth, we remain stagnant. We place a lid on, as I said, the agency, ourselves, the team. Now, guys, it's going to be a great show. I got two guests with us. We got Joe Pomponio, and we also got James Ferreira. But before I bring them on, I just want to do my sponsors. First sponsor is American Military University. Guys, if you're looking to get a degree, seek higher level education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, and also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. And we also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. And guys, be advised, guys, we also have a YouTube channel with them. Guardian RFID, we put content up for them as well. So if you get a chance, please check it out. And Thin Gray Line Media. Guys, if you're looking to publish a book, especially if it's about corrections, please check out www.thingrayline media. They are the one right now that's publishing my next book, which is due out very shortly, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. My journey from officer to administration. If you are ready to take your correctional career to the next level, this, I think, is a great book. We just got done with the line edits. We're finishing the format. Today, I'm hoping to get that book uploaded on Kindle Press so I can order the rough manuscript, go through it one more time, and then it goes live. It is a process, guys. It takes time. I'm a little behind because the line edits, we had to go through it a few times. Sandy Hassan, thank you. Your work with the line edits, great. And also David Schilling, man, the work that you have been putting into this to format it and get it out there. I mean, this guy, he's a beast, guys. Again, you're never going to find somebody more dedicated than him, and also Sandy, in getting the work done. And it is a teamwork, guys. You know, I've been involved in the process as well. They don't leave you out of it, but it is a teamwork because, again, everybody wants to be on the same page, and they want to be proud of the work that all parties have before the book gets sold out in the market. So we're looking for it to be picture perfect, if possible, or as close to perfect as can be. Now, first guest, let's get Joe on. What's up, Joe?
What's happening, Anthony?
Hey, Joe, I got your stuff from Texas. Yeah, it came, 2 days? It's awesome, the stuff that you sent me.
Yeah, that was a lot quicker than I thought it'd be. That's good,
Maybe one day I'll show everybody what you sent me. If you guys are interested, let me know. I'll show you what Joe sent me. But hey, Joe, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Corrections, 30 years, and current panel member of Tier Talk.
Love it. And let me get myself back in. And let me bring in James. What's up, Butch?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Butch got a studio.
A little bit, yeah.
Better than mine.
Can you see this? Can you see the book?
Inmate Manipulation Decoded. I heard that was a good book. Hey, guys, by the way, that is available on Amazon. A link to that is in the description. I always forget to shout that out. Hey, James. What is that?
That's a Command Cloud video showing in the back.
Oh, well, let's do this, James. After you introduce yourself, can you just in short, before we get into the show, can you talk about your son's podcast real quick?
Sure. So my name is James Ferreira, former Assistant Deputy Commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. I started as a correction officer. My career lasted 35 years, 9 months, and enjoying my opportunity to continue to contribute to the profession here on Tier Talk. My son's a communications major at Dean College in Franklin, Massachusetts, and even before he went to school, he got involved with. He always had his heart set on sports and different things. So he commentates for the local cable channel, does the high school football games, baseball games. He'll do anything, basketball, when he's home on Christmas leave and during the summer. And as a result, he put his own podcast together. It's called the Rufus Rundown Podcast. It's on YouTube. He's talked to everyone from his high school football coaches. He's brought on his fellow college athletes. They went to the when he went to UMass Dartmouth, they went to a championship tournament when they were playing basketball, and he spoke with some of the 3,000-point scorers, and he's brought on high school coaches. He's brought on some of my friends that have relationships with him that played, major men's softball and golfers, and he's tried to get just about everybody as a guest on his podcast. But he's a young man that's trying to break through the business, and right now he's at football camp, so his podcast would be put on hold until such time that football's over. I believe he might sneak one or two in there, but they're all on YouTube. I'm looking them all up here. Like I said, he's had everybody from his high school coaches to college baseball players, anyone relative to sports. He said folks from England. He's a big soccer fan. He said folks from England on the show. It's pretty good. It's getting better. He's learning a lot at school. In fact, he's done most of the sports hype videos for the college now, all the different sports, football, baseball, basketball. He's put some programs together for them for their hype videos and stuff. It came out pretty good. So,
all right, well, guys, if you get a chance, you want to check it out. And Rufus is spelled Rufus. It's pretty easy. Just go to YouTube and you put in Rufus. What? Rufus
Rundown Podcast.
Rufus Rundown Podcast, and rundown is one word.
That's correct.
All right, so now, guys, as we get started, this is definitely a needed discussion, because part of the responsibility of moving up, besides taking responsibility of the team, is decision making, and decision making usually comes on the back end of discretion, because guys, policy only affords us so much. I wish policy covers everything. We know it doesn't. So at that point, we need good decision makers. Now, to be honest with you guys, it really develops when you're front line, or it starts to develop, but it definitely needs to increase as you start moving up and getting more areas of responsibility. So again, guys, discretion is something that's needed, yes, at every level, but definitely is something as you move up that you cannot avoid, because as you move up, you are definitely going to be making decisions. There's going to be eventually no one that you can push those decisions off to. Eventually, you are going to be the one who, to some level or some extent, has the immediate final say on an action that's needed. So we kind of broke this discussion down into a few areas that we want to touch on. And again, so I'm on the administrative level. Butch made it all the way to the higher level executive staff, and Joe made it to a lieutenant, which is like the administrative level as well on the custody side. So we're very familiar, all of us, with decision making. But the first area I want to touch on, and I'll go with Joe first, is Joe, I thought I would touch on this first. Higher level of authority increases the need for discretion. So I thought we can kind of discuss what we feel that means. So I thought you can go first with that, Joe. Do you agree with that statement first?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when you're talking about your entry level COs, it's everything's pretty much lined out in black and white. As you start to move up in ranks, your scope starts to broaden out a little bit. Now you're not only responsible for yourself, but you're also responsible for your staff. You're responsible for the operation of the facility. The security, safety, and sanitation of the unit. So definitely as you start to climb the ranks, the need for discretion is definitely there. Not everything is, as you move up, is not as black and white. Common sense has to prevail in there somewhere, where you still abide by policies and still keep the unit operationally safe.
Right. And what's your thoughts on that as well, James? I'm curious.
Pretty similar. The entry level or the inexperienced correction officer probably not going to be put in a position where, he's going to be encouraged or even taught to use discretion at first. I think the most important part of discretion is knowing when it's available to you and when it's really not. And that's at all levels. Because when you do use discretion, there's always the opportunity that you're going to be criticized or second guessed over the decision that you made. Confidence will come with that. But at every level, there is a need to use discretion. And hopefully, if you're constantly using discretion, certainly on the same topic, that you may have to adjust some of your policy so that to put some language in there that may cover that area that you're always using discretion on. You brought up a good example earlier, but yeah, it happens at every level. You have to be careful. It comes with experience, but it is something certainly that correctional folks in this field are going to have to maneuver their way and get used to doing on occasion, especially first line supervisors, shift commanders. They're gonna run into situations where they're gonna have to use discretion. They may have to, make calls, meaning decisions, before they have permission to do that, based on the timing of the incident and what needs to be done.
Yeah, now, guys, be mindful, guys. When we're talking about entering the higher level position, guys, I know most of us are quick to kind of maybe seize the opportunity for external incentives or maybe that higher level authority if you're position driven. But having said that, guys, part of the responsibility of your team, obviously, when you cross into that higher level position, because that should be the main reason why you want to take a high level position, is because you want to take that responsibility, are the decisions that you're going to have to make to be there when those decisions have to be made, because granted, guys, discretion really is about empowerment. So for me, when I was a frontline supervisor and I dealt with the front line, because I knew discretion was a tool that you want to cultivate from the beginning all the way to the highest level, because discretion really does come through learning and growth, I would delegate not task, but authority. So again, if I was a supervisor and I had to give a frontline person a assignment, I would delegate the what. This is what has to be done, but I would empower them to figure out how it has to be done. Because again, you want to cultivate discretion at the first level of entry into this profession, because again, it only grows from that point on. So a great way to do that is to not micromanage your people. It's to delegate the authority for them to do the job. And guys, I want to mention something here too, just as a little sidebar. You're able to delegate authority to someone if they understand their parameters. Most of the time when people don't understand their parameters, because we as management haven't given it to them, then they become lost, they become confused, and they don't want to be empowered because they don't know what to do, because we ourselves haven't given them those parameters in which something needs to be done. Now, granted, guys, again, once you define those parameters, then you go ahead and delegate the authority for them to do the job. And when they're done with the job, they come back. And if you have to look it over, you look it over. But it's an effort to empower. And eventually, guys, the more times you delegate the authority, the more comfortable that person becomes with discretionary things, again, through experience and also on the back end of the confidence that we're providing them in their effort to solve whatever task it is that we've been trying to get them to complete. But Joe, real quick, what's your thoughts on delegating authority versus delegating tasks?
Delegating your authority, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You got, if you're going to delegate your authority, number one, the person that you're delegating your authority to, like you said, must know the parameters. They got to be able to understand the scope of what's in front of them, what's around them. Anybody can delegate a task. It's quite simple enough and easy enough to do. But delegating authority is something that you have to be careful with. You got to make sure that you're delegating authority to somebody that is not only mature enough to handle that scope of authority that you just gave them to delegate, but to carry out the mission, and still keep in mind, the operation of the facility, the safety of the unit, the safety of the employees. Like I said, anybody can delegate a task. That's relatively simple enough.
Now, remember, Joe, when I mean delegating authority, I'm not saying that we're delegating our authority as a supervisor over to them. What I'm saying is I'm delegating the authority to do the job. So basically, if something's passed down to me to get done, and again, it's something it's not something I have to do. It's something I can delegate out. I don't want to micromanage that person by delegating the task. I want to say, hey, this is what was sent to me to get done. You now have the authority to get it done. And I think the best way to kind of see if it's a good move to delegate the authority, and guys, this may sound scary to some, but it's true, is you have to give your staff trust. You do. Guys, even as I move up at the highest level, I have to start. I think as you start to move up in authority, trust is there. It's not earned. It's automatic. Distrust is earned, because I can't go into the higher position micromanaging areas that, yes, I may supervise, but I have little experience in. So I have to give my people some level of trust until they have distrusted. So people are like, well, how do you do that? You give them trust. I mean, it's sad to say, that's part of the responsibility of growth and all these other things. Is it a risk? Yeah, it's a risk. It's always going to be a risk, but there is no growth unless we take those risks. So just for people out there and say, well, I don't know if I can trust them just yet. Well, how do you find out? You're going to find out by giving them maybe a smaller task, give them and see what comes up. But we have to be willing to give out that authority, because if not, my biggest concern is if it's the beginning of their career and we're setting a foundation, I don't want an officer, or I don't want a frontline person to be reliant on others for the end result of let's say, of decision making. I want them to be empowered to do that. So having said that, I think it's very key at the very beginning to set the right foundation and let them know, because guys, this is corrections. And I actually have it. We'll touch on in the next part. We need decision makers at every level in corrections. We do. And the best way for us as managers to, make sure we have decision makers is by empowering people. And again, delegating that level of authority. And for those that may be a little afraid to do so, you as a manager is going to wind up micromanaging, which is not good, because that's going to have the opposite effect. You're going to have people not ready to make a decision, and they may be good at a test, but when they move up, the real world hits them, guys. Guys, I wish in corrections I had an A, B, C, D every time something happened. I don't. I don't have an A, B, C, D. It pretty much goes right down the alphabet, and you got to just kind of see where all these things intertwine, and you're doing it live. You're doing it in the moment. So I think setting a great foundation where you let people know you trust them to make a decision, you cultivate them. So, if they make errors, we're constructive with them. We don't look to, guys, that's one more thing too. An error made by a developmental mistake, as opposed to an error made by negligence or just laziness, are two different things. If you have someone that makes an error on a developmental mistake, you got to cultivate. You got to be careful with that person. You got to be constructive, because you got to be careful that you don't impede that person from growing the next time. So again, people make mistakes. Your approach on that will either continue that person to make decisions, or you could stop that person in his tracks and they become totally reliant. So again, I think setting a foundation, yes, you have to be careful with it. So you can start off slow. I love what you said there, Joe. You can start off small, but we always have to make sure, especially at that frontline level, that we're doing our best to empower our individuals to make sure they can handle the job, because they will get promoted eventually, and we need that skill of decision making. So, I just want to go back to you, Joe, one more time. What was your thoughts on? At least setting that right foundation for decision making.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Because you think about it, when we all came in, we didn't have the already written Bible telling us how to do the jobs. I'd said it once before, when I came in as an entry level officer, there was no training program. Hell, I was taught how to do my job by a convict. As you go, you find that when you got staff that have that little bit of initiative and that eagerness to learn, those are the ones that you definitely want to cultivate. 90% of my decision making and experience came from me falling on my ass numerous times making bad decisions. But you know what? That's when you pick them up, you dust them off, and you let them know what they did wrong, let them know what they did right. Best example for me, to split both hairs, uses of forces. You have your officers that are damn good at literary and verbiage and doing reports. You got your tactical officers that are awesome at putting videos together, gathering evidence, stuff for the use of force. And those are the type of frontline officers that you want to cultivate, because eventually they are going to become supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you want. You want people that have initiative, common sense, and not afraid to put themselves out there and make a mistake. Because hell, we've all done it numerous times. Hell, I'd run out of fingers and toes if I told you how many times I've made mistakes over the course of my careers. But the main thing is how you handle it with those individuals. Don't berate them, pick them up, dust them off. Hey man, it is what it is. You messed up, but this is what you did right. So next time, this is what we need to do. The best thing you could do is not so much delegate your authority, but delegate your experience.
Yeah, I like that, because I actually think what part of that is, and we'll get to that, evaluated experience answers the why behind how things are done. So I think that really does help when you're trying to delegate authority behind a task that someone may not be familiar with. I actually like that, because that's what you technically are doing. Because again, that's, believe it or not, I believe, especially when you are a good leader, for those that when you go to delegate authority, whatever it is, you also have to model the right behavior that you want, and that and that should be expected. So again, you can't delegate authority if you yourself aren't comfortable with authority. So yeah, I like that. And hey, James, real quick, James, at the very beginning, when it comes to delegating that authority, and I kind of want to retouch what me and Joe were discussing. What's your thoughts on what I said about, as you move up, you kind of have to trust everyone, and kind of distrust is earned? What's your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that?
So I do. I do. I remember that in many cases, one of my mantras, I had a lot of mantras, but I always wanted to make sure that in those circumstances where I could get feedback from the staff, ask them, give them the freedom to figure out the hows. Those were always nice. That's not always the case. Sometimes we're being told what we need to do, and not only that, how we need to get it done. And they need that for consistency reasons, especially when it came to labor management type issues, to make sure if one facility straight off and did it another way, the bosses would hear from the executive staff about, well, they're not doing it that way. So a lot of times we got some strict direction and weren't able to use discretion in a lot of areas, which was a poor way to do business. But that's the case. So, if you're say you're a new deputy warden, or you're transferred from one facility to the next, and now you're coming in first day, yeah, you might have all the experience in the world with uses of force, or locking the place down, or responding to this, or responding to that, problems in the Sally Port, so on and so forth. But, it's your first day on the job. So you're going to have to depend on the person underneath you, whether it's a chief of security or the shift commander, to make some decisions on his own, and then evaluate their effectiveness or his competency after. But understanding again that there's some areas that have a lot of room for discretion, and there's some areas that have none at all. But yeah. You're gonna have to trust people. Hopefully, they've shown some confidence to get where they're at. And then you can always go back and evaluate the decisions and criticize it later, because we're good at that in corrections, Monday morning quarterbacking. But as long as again, a good subordinate looking for trust, or looking to be an asset to the supervisor or to their leaders, will use discretion. When they do, they'll document it or report it. And not only, they'll say, okay, this is what I have, and this is what I've done so far, and this is my plan. I loved it when I got those calls. We may critique, what they're doing, or we may say that's an excellent plan. Go ahead and finish up. There's a way to do it. Sometimes time permits, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I agree with you, Anthony. I mean, corrections is hard enough. Excuse me. In those institutional management positions where you can't be doing the shift commander's work for them, or the first line supervisor or the lieutenant, so you're going to have some built-in trust there. And then I think you'll learn who you can trust more and who you can trust less, and how you deal with that will be differently with every person.
Well, yeah, and by the way, guys, just want to mention something, and I like the clicking of the pen there, James.
Yeah, that's a bad habit, huh?
Yeah, it was in rhythm to your wonderful answer. No, but it worked. It worked. It calmed me down. No, so I want to add something. So, guys, again, yes, discretion is something that we have to empower. We just talked about that, and again, the trust. Trust, again, as you move up, trust is kind of automatic because you're in survival mode. Now, granted, guys, I want to mention something here too. There are going to be certain things that the agency is going to push down that, yes, we're very limited in our discretion. But I found something, and again, guys, nothing's perfect, nothing's 100%, but I do feel that when the agencies at the highest level, when they go to implement these strategic ideas, for the most part, you would like to think that they would leave it in the hands of the facility, because each facility runs different. So they may come up with a generalized idea and they may pass it down, and then we as a facility can determine how that idea can be applied. So the operations side of it all. And then what we do is we bring up the front line or the people that are involved, and we discuss the tactical side. Okay, so I may come up with the operations side of, well, okay, these are all the different departments we need. And, but now I have to go to each department to discuss how we're going to do this tactically. I think that if we can build investment and people could see at the highest level that we're not resistant for the things that have to be done, they will start trusting us more in the how. So this doesn't just really go from the facility, but also at the highest level. Maybe the highest level sometimes feel they have to micromanage us because they feel that we're not as invested in a positive outcome because we are just resistant to where we think we're changing. And it's like, I still like to get away from the word change. I like evolve. I believe that if we start using the right words like evolve and bring people in on this, then the highest level will see, you know what? They're for what we're doing. I don't see why there's a reason to micromanage it. Just tell them what we need, and that facility is going to carry it out. And that's great, because I'm going to be honest with you. The more we allow that to happen, the more the frontline people will want to get involved because they're invested, and the success of that will be something that they can really be proud of because they're a big part of it. So having said that, that's just not on a micro level, but also on a macro level. So as we're talking about maybe a lieutenant dealing with a sergeant, dealing with an officer, you also at the highest level, the agency's upper echelon and how they view that house. Is this a house that we can trust to carry out what we need? Or do we have to micromanage that house? And guys, you don't want to micromanage the house. You don't. So again, you come up with this idea, you give it to the person who runs the house and says, hey guys, we need to get this done. It has to happen. And then me as the house owner says, not a problem. I'll talk to my people and we'll tell you exactly how we're going to get this done. And I work for management that's pretty good with that, to be honest with you. They'll just kind of say, hey guys, we got to implement that. And they'll kind of give you the base policy. And then you go ahead and, see how that applies to how we could do it in the house. Because again, each house runs differently. So you got to be very careful of when you want to put a generalized policy and try to get it to apply the same way at each facility. And again, guys, how do we do that? Is by trusting in the discretion of the people on the tactical side. The people on the tactical side, it's again, empowering them and trusting in their discretion. And a big part of that, guys, if you're on front line, I want you guys to hear me out on this. Exhaust every effort so I can trust when you have to say no. That's all I'm saying. If you want me to trust you, then I want to see that you're making every effort to make what needs to be carried out work. And if it doesn't, then come back and tell me this is why, and I can trust you and say, hey, Joe told me it was no. I'm going to go with Joe on this. I'm not going to second guess Joe because I know Joe. I know Joe went out there. He was invested in the plan. He came up with all these solutions. And unfortunately, every effort Joe has made doesn't seem to work. Now, we're more than happy to take if you guys want to come down and try it out. But I know for a fact I can trust Joe. And if Joe says it's not going to work, I'm pretty sure it won't, because not only does Joe, because let's say Joe's my lieutenant, Joe also trusts his people who also said they couldn't carry out. So look how that travels down, guys. I mean, think about that. I trust Joe because Joe is going to, I know Joe's going to push on his people to get it done, but Joe trusts his people because they are going to get it done. So now when Joe comes up to me and says he can't get it done, I'm getting the information from the end results of how many people that have tried. How many people have tried an honest effort, and those that are closest to it. I'll go to Joe first and Butch, but what's your thoughts on all that, Joe? And because that does relate to discretion.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, any in a particular example that you gave where, your upper echelon or your executive level passes something down and wants, we'll take Texas, for example. You got, 97, 98 different prison units, and each facility is different. When you try to implement something, you're not just thinking about the security side aspect. You're thinking about the administrative side too. Some of the things you try to implement, cross over and kind of blend over into other departments such as classification, education, vocation, maintenance, food service. So, you definitely know you're good leaders because those are the ones that will gather everybody together and say, hey guys, this is what we need to do. This is what the upper echelon is requiring policy-wise. We got to figure out a way to implement it. And, when you start seeking input from those below you to help you accomplish the mission, man, that's a win-win. Not only are you keeping your staff engaged, you're showing them right off the bat that you're giving them the trust for you to help them devise a plan and a unit level SOP or policy to incorporate things to get it done. I mean, it's just a win-win for everybody.
And guys, I just want to mention something. So the reason why, again, we're crossing into this discussion is because we did mention earlier before that the power of discretion, there's nothing certain in corrections. That means that policies sometimes are built on the successes and failures, but because we're forever evolving, or because you have a policy doesn't mean that policy is written in ink. It's not. It's written in pencil with a big eraser on it because, it's going to keep on evolving. It's going to keep on growing. And how that occurs is through discretion. So I know some people, and this kind of touches into the next part, where they cross into the supervisory position. And then when you tell them, hey, because guys, when you work the front line, we train you to, be ready to say no. Be ready to say no because you're dealing with the inmate population. That's pretty much going to be what you need to do most of the time. Because most of the time when an inmate asks you to do something, it's because they can't. And they're playing the game. Because trust and believe, the stuff that they can do, they're not going to ask you. They're going to do it. And they're going to want you to challenge them because in their mind, it's their right. Now, granted, we push for the no a lot because that's in direct relationship to the inmate population. But as you move up, you want to do what's best for your people. So the yes sometimes tends to be harder to give. So it's a little bit of a switch as you move up. The no is what you're fighting for when you're that front line. But as you move up and you're dealing with the people who are in charge of the inmates, you want to help them, so and you want to keep the facility operating, so you want to try to push towards yes. And sometimes for me, as I moved up, I found that the yeses are sometimes harder to deliver, but again, guys, we're dealing with our people and we're not dealing with inmates. So I want people to know that, when we're dealing with our people who have a job to do, who have to be effective and who are in those trusted positions, policy may say one thing, but then we're put in these appointed positions or these higher level of authority positions. So we can say, policy may not be correct on this. Now, there have been some people that when I talk about discretion, they'll be quick to say, and this is what gets into this topic here is, well, Gangi, I'm not breaking policy. I said, hold on. The reason why you're in a supervisory position is because we know that policy doesn't cover everything. There are going to be certain circumstances that's going to require us to revisit policy. Now, if I went there and said, hey, I get what you're saying, then you quickly say no to it. The problem is we never grow. We never grow. We remain stagnant. And there are going to be some times where things conflict with what policy expects, because, again, there are going to be situations that you just don't know could happen. But once it does happen, then utilizing that discretion is a chance to expand policy. So when someone comes to me and says, hey, Gangi, I'm it says that this has to be a no, so therefore I'm going to keep it a no because I don't want to violate policy. It's like, hold on, you're put in a higher position, you're paid more to make a decision. Trust and believe. If I needed everything directly from what policy said, then I don't need a decision maker. I don't need a decision maker because it's all there. I need decision makers because, again, policy doesn't cover everything. So, again, discretion for me is not about breaking policy. It's not about violating policy. It's about expanding policy. And guys, one last thing before I get to James real quick is that yes and no are maybe seen as the extreme, where if I say yes, that's a violation of what a no is. No, there's such thing as justified yeses, just like there's such things as a justified no. It would have been a yes or it would have been a no, but having said that, these are the circumstances that I dealt with that made me change it to a yes. And again, in administration, you find out a lot of that discretionary yeses usually come when you have conflicts with departments who both have a good argument of why something should be the way it is, and then you now have to come in the middle and solve the matter. And guess what? If both departments are saying no, we don't move. So we have to find a way to say a joint yes, and then again expand policy. That's the key. So again, as you move up, discretion is a lot harder because you're looking to give the yeses to the people that have to do the job to keep the facility operational. But when someone says, well, Gangi, are you telling me to violate policy? No, I'm telling you this is how policy expands. What's your thoughts on what I said, James, about the violation of policy versus the look of expanding policy in relationship to discretion, if what I'm saying makes sense?
So let's make no mistake, in my personal opinion, I don't think that anyone has the authority to violate an agency policy. So unless you're the commissioner and you're changing your mind on the spot, or the director, no one has the authority to deviate from agency policy. Now, having said that, I do agree that policy does not cover, and you should have a statement in your library of policies which says that, not every, policy is not going to cover every situation that may arise. So I think that when you are forced to, use discretion and expand some policy directives, it's going to happen. And it's going to come with experience, and even some inexperienced people are going to be put in a position to expand what policy says. But again, I think the important part is to understand that there are parameters when there's room for discretion. And then when you do use discretion, I really do think you should document it, just so that, I hate to use these words, but cover your ass. Because if you're not reporting it, it kind of gives the flavor of you hiding it. And it gives you opportunity for, senior level folks to evaluate, the need to maybe expand the policy, change the policy. You should be looking at your policies at least annually anyway.
Hey, Butch, I just want to say what you said was spot on real quick. And I just got to compliment on one of your thoughts, the documentation. And yes, when you document, because we should have said that, you're right, 100%. When you document it and you justify your reasons, good knowledge of policy and documenting where policy could not meet what needed to be done is truly effective in those reports, because it shows that you have knowledge of the policy, and it's a great way to start your argument and why you made the decision that had to be done. That's spot on, Butch. Thanks for that.
Because I can tell you, if I found out later and it wasn't through an official report, I found out through an inmate grievance or a complaint or a lawsuit or something else, at first I'm going to be less, far less pleased, that we did that. But so yeah, I mean, policy, like I said, is a guideline, but there are going to be things that come up that you're going to need to expand your thought process to, just to de-escalate some situations. You may have to, use a little bit of discretion and not run right to the black and white of the policy. And then, once you get the area isolated, contained, and under control, you may go back to actually doing what the intent of the policy wants you to do. But corrections is a people business, so there's going to be all kind of variables, and you're going to use a lot of discretion, and you're going to use more as you move up.
Yeah, and Joe, I want your thoughts on this as well, Joe, because for me, and we'll touch on this in the next part, a lot of discretion, especially as you move up, and it's kind of developed, as I said, through evaluated experience. By the way, guys, what I mean by evaluated experience is that experience without evaluations, it doesn't really give you knowledge or wisdom. It's just, I went through it. Okay, what does that mean? 18 years of experience. No, listen, you could have someone with 18 years of experience who, okay, they have 18 years of experience, but you could have someone with 3 years of evaluated experience, and watch how fast that person in 3 years grows, compared to the person who just passively experiences things. I was a person who really evaluated my experiences. But one of the things that I wanted to mention here was when you start evaluating your experiences, you may, not have to always lean on policy and procedure to check for a decision, because it turns out to be a lot of the decisions we make are really based on common sense that relates to our evaluated experiences. Most of the time when I ask a senior officer who, is more familiar with the post than I am, how certain things are done, this person doesn't have to run the policy and read policy to me. No, this person now has developed so much evaluated experience that everything to them, they could just rattle it off and it just becomes common sense. So, Joe, what's your thoughts on just like as you move up and you really start evaluating those experiences, what's your thoughts on discretion really being developed through common sense decision making?
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely crucial, especially during critical incidents. And I'll give you one for example. For a while here in this state, we were having big issues with offender suicides. A lot of them were just playing just to get that cry of help. And what they would do, coincidentally, is make a makeshift noose. They would put it around their neck, but they wouldn't tie off to nothing. Well, our use of force guidelines really didn't cover, even though we had a policy in place for inmate suicides or suicide attempts, there wasn't really nothing in the use of force manual to really combat what to do if. So what was happening was some of these offenders were actually tying off both ends, and some of your shift supervisors were just going in with the gas and gassing them. Well, they would lose their footing, and what ultimately happened, we actually had some successful suicides, not because they tried, but because we made decisions that we didn't think about, off the top of our heads. And later on, a bunch of lieutenants got together and said, hey, look, we need to add some sort of verbiage to our use of force continuum, saying that anytime that an offender has any kind of ligature on them or tied off to anything, at no time will we use chemical agents, because the use of chemical agents could further the harm and make the situation worse than what it needs to be. That's one of those things where, you're not thinking about that right off the top. You're already having a bad day. You've already had, 3 uses of forces. The shift is running tight on time. And then you have this happen. Sometimes you make decisions that aren't the most popular. And sometimes you make them decisions that definitely don't win over anybody. But you have to use discretion. You have to think outside the box. You have to think, outside the picture, and still try to keep the operation of the facility within policy guidelines. There's always going to be things where, there's going to be a common sense gray line that you have to adapt to, especially as you move up. The example that you gave earlier before we actually went live, Anthony, was a perfect example. There's policies in place to what happens if you can't clear. And, as a supervisor, you have to understand that. You've got to, knowledge of the policy is key, just like Butch said. You have to know your policies. You have to have justification to cover your own ass in the end run.
Yeah, and you know what you're saying, Joe, that's spot on. Can I mention something, guys? So policies in play to make things work. So there could be a point where, as you move up, again, you want to try to keep things moving, where the policy is a conflict to making things work. And you have to ask yourself, is this conflict necessary? Or is there something that I can do, again, to get this thing get operations back to where it needs to be? Because I know that when you move up and you're employed to make those higher level decisions, one of the things they tell you is that, again, guys, don't take things at face value. There's deeper meaning to what I'm saying. But again, this is just a quick discussion. It's more of a surface level. But your objective is always to keep the facility moving where it needs to be. So when there's a hiccup, you have to try to figure out, is this hiccup an obstacle? Could I work my way around it? Or is this hiccup literally a stop? And, and the only person that could really realize that are again, us as a team. Us as a team, we can come together and say, Gangi, I know there's a hiccup here, but we could do these things to get around it. And then you make the decision to keep the momentum going. I mean, that's the key. I mean, I'll be honest with you, technically, whether you're looking at the highest level or even from the front line level to the immediate supervisor, anytime there's a hiccup where things are supposed to be moving, but it's not. So that really doesn't matter what level you're at. Just, the supervisors that are directly over that area, your job is to do what? How do I get things moving? Because corrections, prisons, jails, we run on a fucking very tight schedule, and you know it. And even a minute could set us back. That's how tight our schedule is. A minute. We value a minute in corrections like you wouldn't believe. So our objective is, how do we get that momentum? How do we keep things going? And again, try to keep ourselves on that time that we're expected to complete whatever the things are throughout the course of the day. So again, having that, one, definitely a level of empowerment and a level of trust, but to understand that sometimes we have to make a common sense decision based on our evaluated experiences of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And Joe mentioned something before that's key. In order to develop discretion, you're going to have to go out of your comfort zone. And sometimes what that means is, as I said, policy may not cover everything, but we always have to make an attempt to bring things back to policy, and that does sometimes mean we're going to go outside just in an effort to bring it back. Outside does not mean you're violating. Outside just means, oh shit, we got to do something to get this back to where it needs to be, because right now we're so far left. So I can't let this go any further left. So all of us can't stay here when the problem's over there. So we all go over there, see what we can do, and we bring it back to here. We bring it back to where we need to be. But if all of us want to remain in our comfort zone, then the problems over here are only going to get worse, because no one's making the effort to get the problem and bring it back. And who makes the effort to get the problem and bring it back are the people that make the decisions to do that. Hey guys, this policy thing isn't working. Let me just go ahead and see what I can do. And then like Butch said before, I'll go ahead and document it. And I'll guarantee you, if you did a good job and you justified where that failure was, your documentation will probably be verbatim when they update the policy. It'll probably be verbatim, like just pretty much, hey, this is great. And this kind of touches into the next part. So guys, when we're looking to evaluate a decision that we have to make, and we kind of touched on a lot of things here, I want to add one more thing before we come to a close, probably the most important thing, because a lot of us, we look for excuses not to have to make a decision that could be out of our comfort zone. And to be honest with you guys, no facility, no growth ever happens at the other end of an excuse. It's progress. And when I have to make a decision, you could always lean on the worst case scenario and constantly say no, 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 no. Now, mind you, guys, talking about supervisors who got to work with their people who oversee the inmates. Okay, so remember what I'm saying here, because this is maybe a little bit opposite advice that I would give for a frontline officer or a frontline staff member dealing directly with an inmate. I'm talking about people that are in charge of the people that are in charge, or whatever it is, of the inmate. I'm talking about the people that work for us that have a mission to get done, and our job is to help them complete that mission. If there's something that has to be done, and we got departments in conflict, right? And everybody's going at this extreme of what could happen, what could happen, what could happen. All of a sudden, as the decision maker, we get caught up in what we call like universal precaution. Well, universal precaution doesn't mean you stop. It means, all right, let me slow it down a little bit and let me see how I can still move forward. Because universal precaution is still an effort to move forward. And this is where you weigh in probability versus likelihood. And this matters, guys. This matters. Yes, there's a likelihood that this could happen. But what is the probability it could happen? And that matters. I talked about an incident a while ago. I could bring it up again just to emphasize this thought. And I think it really is a good thing, again, to kind of bring up. But I had an issue one time, let's say, with medical and custody, where there may have been a mistake made, and medical need our help. And we wind up having an inmate that had to come into the facility who was going through a double hernia. And you custody and medical had two conflicts in policy. They had two conflicts in policy in regards to getting this inmate into the facility. This inmate had a double hernia. So, having his inmate going through a pat search and all this other stuff may not be the best. But again, as custody, that's our job. That's safety and security. But medical's like, I got to get him in. I got to get him in, and we can't go through all this because the inmate can't move. So again, not saying we didn't, jail a little bit to get it done. But again, we made a decision which was able to be justified. Like later on, it's what's the likelihood this person could have a weapon versus at this point with a guy with a double hernia that you can clearly see poking out. What's the probability of them having a weapon? And then granted, like James said, did my documentation, never lied, said exactly what I did. And you could clearly see the self-preservation for the life, that we have, and the choice was made. If you start thinking that, you're going to make decisions based on a likelihood as opposed to a probability, you're never, ever going to move forward, because everything in corrections is going to be a complicated decision that's always going to have a worst case scenario. Always. There's always going to be a bad result to some immediate decisions that have to be made. There's always going to be that bad result. So if you're going to head and try to make a decision on a likelihood, then you're never going to move forward. You're never going to make a decision, and you're just not going to be effective in whatever position of authority you have. So you, as a supervisor, step in, and when everybody else is thinking likelihood, you're thinking probability, and then you make your decision based on that probability. And Joe, I just want to ask you something. What's your thoughts on what I just said? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you grow as a supervisor, you've got to take that risk and put yourself out there, because if you're afraid to make choices based on the likelihood of something happening, you're never going to be confident in your own abilities. Number one, your people below you and above you won't be confident in your abilities and your decision-making process. One good example, visitation. We had an inmate whose mother was deployed, and the inmate did not put her on his visitation list because he figured, he was only going to be in 3 years. She was going to be deployed. There was no sense in it. Well, the mother came back for a 2-week R&R and came to the facility and wanted to visit her son. And she's in uniform, military uniform. At the time, our duty warden had to run to the other side of the facility because there was an incident going on over there, which left me basically in charge of the facility. So I had two decisions. I could either interrupt that duty warden who was dealing with a mass critical incident over there, or I can make a decision. So the decision I made was, I was able to identify this woman as this inmate's mother. She is listed in his ancestry report, in his classification folder. So I went on ahead and made the decision, which, most duty wardens have that discretion. I made the decision to go ahead and let her visit her son. And, when the duty warden came back, he was like, they said, you let somebody in that wasn't on the approved visitors list. Yes, sir. Absolutely correct. And this is who she was. And this is why I did what I did. And, when the duty warden says, hey, just put it on paper, I'll sign it any day of the week. Those are the type of decisions that, as you grow, you got to learn, what was the probability or likelihood that she was bringing in contraband? Nil to none. You could tell she was obviously a deployed mother with our armed forces who was back and she wanted to see her son, and you got to take all of that into consideration. But, the main thing is you can't be afraid to make a decision. If you're afraid to make a decision, then, there was no reason for you to go up for supervision to begin with, because at some point you're going to be called on to make that decision, shoot from the hip. You're either going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, trust me, somebody will pick you up, dust you off, tell you why you did it wrong. And, that's where you gain your experience.
And what's great, Joe? The conversation right now is actually good for all levels, because decision making really does start at the front line. But also we're telling leaders or managers, build that trust with your people so they make decisions. Like you said, be constructive, help them grow, because a developmental mistake's a lot different than a negligent inaction or whatever it would be. It's developmental mistakes, guys, are something that we have to do our best to cultivate and help that person grow, because again, if you do it wrong, that person just stops moving. Hey, Butch, what's your thoughts on what we were just talking about when we're talking about probability versus likelihood?
I like the difference from where I sit and then where you guys sit. So there is I have a little different flavor. I want to make sure that when we do use discretion, and I remember that incident where you had the inmate with the hernia and all that, and I wasn't there, so those are the ones that scare me, because I see that the entry level folks or the line staff see some deviation from policy going on, and then they think they can do it. And that's when it gets, there has to be an understanding that, there was a decision made to deviate or to expand from our local procedures or our agency policy based on life-saving issues. And we did some things to mitigate the risks or the discretion that we took. I see Joe laughing. Right, I know, I'm right.
I know, I'm joking.
Because I'm going to take the heat for the people who do it right, So I reserve the right to be critical of all of that at that level, but I think we do need to think about mitigating circumstances to reduce the likelihood of the outcome. I see a lot of things in transportation where I watched a lot of Russ's stuff. I have a good example of we had this doctor in the agency when I ran the transportation division that started to write no waste change for folks that had colostomy bags. So I had to have a meeting, and we had all these inmates, and some of them were heavy hitters. And, you couldn't cuff them in the back and then sit them in the car. So now they got handcuffs in the front, and you folks know as well as I do, is handcuffed in the front, you might as well not have any handcuffs on, because it does absolutely nothing. So I came up with a process where we would take a connected chain and connect the handcuffs with the leg irons without it going around the belly. And you'd be pretty proud of some of the officers. They immediately say, "You can't do that. Policy prohibits connecting the leg irons to the handcuffs." And I said, "That is true, but the intent of that part of the policy is that we don't hog tie inmates where the handcuffs go all the way down to the leg iron." That was the intent. And they said, "Well, we don't feel comfortable doing that." I said, if some, and then, obviously I made a change to the policy and different things, but you have to trust me that I have your back if this is challenged during this specific transportation detail, and I'm giving you the authority to do that. So, but when they see us deviating or expanding, sometimes they think they can do it. And some of this stuff has to be done at the appropriate level. And so that, we don't have anything catastrophic happen. This policy is written for a reason. And it is modified for a reason. So when bad things happen, we put things in place as well. So, I saw inmates in wheelchairs that, get up and walk away easy. They manipulated the medical staff to write orders for wheelchairs and all this other stuff. So, but if we didn't move forward with that, I could have been lazy and said we're not taking the trip, having the institution take the trip. But we were the transportation division, and it was our job to take it. But we were going to take them safely and securely, protect the public. But that's my different take on it. I want to make sure that those line staff that helped you get that guy through the trap, or the vestibule, or the sally port, whatever you call it, in your part of the country, that that was something special, and they shouldn't make those decisions on their own.
No. As I said, I mean, first off, by the way, everything's always filtered. I do believe that the higher level supervisors, the one that are furthest removed from the front line, do want some form of discretion from the people that are closest to it, and they just want to be notified. Maybe just give me the notification for the approval. Because again, you're going to have some people that have never been through that experience before, so you can't expect me at the highest level to employ discretion for people who are more experienced at the lowest level. So I do want them. You're right. You're 100%. And there's two other things that you mentioned that were spot on that I don't want to miss out before we come to a close. Definitely, maybe even a whole nother discussion. One thing that James mentioned right now is that, yes, the reason why you expand the policy is going to be to mitigate the likelihoods. I think so. You kind of said that, and I think that's spot on. I mean, I'm added a little bit to it, but I know that's what you meant. I don't think I broke away from what you meant, correct?
No, perfect. Especially on the example. Joe's example was very good. Yeah, she wasn't on the list, but he went into the classification. He saw that the woman was registered as his mother. I would have been happy with that. I would have been happy with that decision. Yeah. Because, what the alternative was, you're going to turn the mother away, home on 2 weeks leave. We would have heard about that, and it may not have been the best decision to make. So that was a good decision. But he did things to mitigate it. He didn't just say, "Oh, she's in uniform, come on in." He went and verified the story a little bit.
Right, and that crosses into something else you said that actually does pan off into what Joe did. Guys, this is I know people may not think but this is something that we just evolved into right now to really help you guys out. So please pay attention. This is why we have these discussions, and they're a little bit lengthier, because the dialogue develops. Because if we were just going off tips real quick, you wouldn't get to this point. But there's something else that you said that really touches into what Joe said that helps you develop discretion. And it's right here. The intent of the policy helps us develop discretion. Joe knew that the agency is probably going to want to do what they can to get that visit off. See? So to me, I want to mention something, and we got to explore this last part because I don't want to leave it out there. That's sort of what I kind of said before about keeping things operational. Like, I know that I got to keep these things running. I know that's what the facility's expecting, right? So when I employ discretion, it's not in, this is a great way to say it actually, because we were talking about violating and expanding. Violating is something that conflicts, that is an opposite of what the policy intends, So again, I'm not even in a position to do that. Hey, we're going to do that. And what I mean is, what are we supposed to do? Okay. So maybe the policy conflicts now with us getting that done. Because maybe we have two departments with two different policies, but both policies may have the same end result, just a different journey and how it takes to get there. So having said that, knowing the intent is kind of like the end result. So you reverse engineer. I know I have to get here, so let me just figure it out. So I think that is spot on. The intent of the policy helps us develop discretion. That's why I said we're not violating. And what I mean by violating is we're not violating what the policy overall wants to accomplish. That's the thing here. Like, all because the policy may say you got to go this way, and I say, "Ooh, that's not going to work today. Let's go this way." I'm still going this way based on what the policy still wants as an end result. The policy wants this as an end result. Just right now, this road is blocked, so I'm going to go this way. So again, it's not violating. It's going to be eventually something that we're going to expand on, because what happens when this road's blocked next time? Well, Gangi decided we can go this way, and that seems to work. So again, when James said intent and emerged with Joe's story, Joe asked himself one thing: what's the end result? What does this policy want us to accomplish as the end result? Okay, so right now I can't take this road. I'm going to go ahead and take this road, and therefore there is no violation. The end result was met, just met in a different means. Now let me go justify why I had to go that route by using where policy failed me. And again, if I had to read that as administration to the table the next day, bravo, thank you for keeping us within what policy expected. So again, I thought that was phenomenal when you said that, James. The intent and the mitigate. What a great add-on to the end. Do you guys have any thoughts related to that? I'll go with Joe first. The intent of policy, and I just thought that was a great add-on to this discussion. That we never did that before.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's a huge difference between a one-off command decision scenario versus everyday complacency. Sometimes you're forced to make decisions from the hip, even if they're above your pay grade. Sometimes you're forced to make those decisions, but you got to keep, mitigating factors in mind. Policy, likelihood and probability of any kind of danger to the safety and security of the unit. In this instance with the visitation, just like Butch said, the first thing that came to mind was, I was going to let her in regardless, but you also think about the end result. Could I have said no? Absolutely. I would have been totally within my right to tell her no, but then she would have left, called the regional director's office. The regional director's office would have called the executive director's office. And then probably within 2 hours, I'd been called to the warden's office and called everything but a child of God, and, you also, you're not only thinking about yourself, you're thinking about that family member who's deployed. You're thinking about the wellness of the visitation program as a whole. You're thinking about keeping the offender, within your mission guidelines of promoting a positive behavior change in this offender's behavior and trying to keep him on the straight path. So, there's a lot of things in play when you make those kind of decisions. But there's definitely a difference between making a command initial decision on a one-off scenario versus everyday complacency where you just let any Tom, Dick, or Jane just come on in and visit. So, being able to know the policy, being able to know what your limits are, what your boundaries are crucial. But at the same time, like I said, you've got to be confident enough to make those decisions and be intellectual enough to be able to back it up with policy, put it on paper, and make sure that your tail's covered.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. I mean, again, if you're ever in a position where you have to start making a decision that may feel outside, what a great, safe question to ask. What's the intent of policy? And what's funny? I do that. Again, obviously, I mean, I do that. I just never thought of it out loud like that. It was never been expressed that way. But again, if I'm looking to solve a matter, it's always going to be, well, what are we supposed to do? And then basically you tell everybody what's the best way to get there now, because we can't take this road. We got to take this road. So knowing the intent of what's behind and what's going to be the end result is a great way to kind of roadmap yourself to, what decision you have to make to get that as an end result.
And one other thing too, Anthony, I wanted to add in there was, you also got to think about those people above you. Say Butch was my duty warden who was off doing another, didn't handle any other critical incident on the other side of the farm. Anthony is my senior warden who's actually off that weekend. So he's left the facility, to Butch to run for the weekend. You also got to think about too, what decision am I going to make that is not going to put Butch in the crosshairs and get him crossed out. I don't want to make a decision that I know is faulty to begin with, and he gets the blame for it because I know I'm not going to get the blame for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
those are other things you got to think about too. You can't just think about yourself and below. You got to think about the decisions you make affecting those people above you too.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's kind of parallels what James said before when, making that notification, because again, the people that trust me to make decisions, again, when you know your parameters, you know what decision's yours to make and what's not yours. Now, granted, all because something may not be my decision, it doesn't mean my opinion towards it doesn't have value. It just means I may not be the one to have the final decision on that matter. So again, if I'm an administrator, right, and I'm on call and something's happening in the facility where I'm getting the notification, right, believe it or not, because I'm not on site, I'm not there. I may provide some guidance if needed, but most of the time when you're working at a facility that's empowered, they're just notifying you of the actions that they've taken, for the most part. And if there is an action that they feel, they're not afraid to take it because they're giving you the solution, but they feel it may not be in their authority to make that decision, then you help them and give them of course, do that. Because most of the time they know what has to be done, but they also know where their decision making is limited. And what I mean by that is where they have the final result. Like, are they able to make that decision? So then technically they'll go to you and they'll say, hey, Gangi, we did A, B, and C, and we want to do D. So then D is a higher level decision. It's a great, then D's a higher level decision, and they notify you, and then you come back and it's like, yeah, of course, because again, I'm far removed. I'm home. They're living in the moment. Let me back that choice up, and then we move through the day. Now we're all on the same page together when we present it at the next daily briefing. And by the way, too, that doesn't just stop at that level either, because we also have to call things in another level. So there'll be certain things where, we're empowered to make a decision as well, but I still may have to call up at my level and say, hey guys, I this is what we have going on, blah, 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 blah. And again, I did A, B, and C, and I would like to do D. Okay, you got that, Gange. The one thing I do expect though, guys, for those that got to call in and notify, I don't like, what should I do? I kind of like, hey, I was thinking about doing these things, and then we could discuss it, because to be honest with you, you're in a better position to know the things that need to be done. And then we could discuss it if there are certain things that need to be discussed, but you're always in a better position. So for those that have to relay the information to someone who, maybe on call, whatever it is, you're not just relaying information saying, I don't know what to do. You got to give some solution so we have a foundation to work from. And then now we can all get together and say, okay, I like that. Let's do this. And now we're working together. Now we're really piecing things together and figuring out what the best option is. Hey, James, what's your thought on that before we come to our closing dialogue?
So one thing I want to say about Joe's scenario is as happy as I would have been with the decision that he made based on the mitigating the steps that he took to mitigate, expanding policy, making sure I'm using the right language. I would have been equally disappointed if I had found out that the woman, he was raised by his grandmother. There's no record of a mother. She was barely meeting the dress code. There were different circumstances there, and that you just, for whatever reason, whether you thought the administration would have thought, there's a list of approved visitors for a reason, and we need to stick with that. So I just wanted to bring that up so the folks out there understand that.
Well, I want to No, you're right. I want to add something. So, like something like that happens, right? So again, going back to Joe's scenario, one of the things I would have done, and I'm sure Joe probably did it. I think he did, is you also go to the inmate to see if they want the visit first. So she's been verified as his mother. How are you with having this visit? You know, and then if the inmate says, "Oh," because sometimes they may not be on the list for a reason.
Yeah, that could.
You know, so I would definitely go to the inmate and say, "Are you okay with having this visit? Because she's your mother. It's emergency contact. Maybe you don't have her on your list because she could be assigned to some government position where some of them, it's happened. You got some family members that can't go on any list, not even to visit a facility. They'll give you a fake name or they won't give you a name at all. And then you got to kind of work out something with the facility. So what I tend to do at that point is, try to verify at least through phone who you are, and then talk to the inmate to see if this is a visit that you want. And then again, there's what the discretion is. You know, again, you're not violating policy. Again, you're just, what is the intent? To get them to visit, you know, because believe it or not, let me get the outside world to understand one thing right now. Our intent and part of the agency's mission and part of what we have people at the facilities for is to provide the inmates with these rights, with these necessities. And that is technically a right. Some level of visit, whether contact or non-contact, because believe it or not, contact visit is not a right.
That's
contact visit is not a right. Don't let people think it, but visits itself, yes, to some extent, I'll give you that because it does help towards rehabilitation. Our effort is to get those visits going, you know, if possible, unless there's a hiccup. So Joe understood what the higher level mission is. And remember, even I said before, because I know that I'm always OCD. I said before that dealing with the inmate saying no is one thing, and then obviously as you move up saying yes to staff. When you're saying things, I still said it's to facilitate the operations of the facility. I want people to know the operations of the facility directly relate to the dealing of the inmate as a whole. Everything we do pretty much circles around the needs for those inmates, which includes, at a big part of it all, the main part, safety and security. So having said that, what's the function we want to accomplish? This is the function. And Joe, knowing that what the end game is, and then doing his best to facilitate that, is really a great way to, you know, make a decision and then be able to justify that decision. So when Joe went back to his administrative warden and did all his, cross his T's and dot all his I's, if I was the warden, just like James said, 100% is, I get why you did it. So now I want to also mention one other thing. If I didn't agree with that visit being done, I would have probably still appreciated the effort from Joe because I know what the intent was about. Again, we talked about developmental mistakes. You know, I know Joe, because it could have been easier for Joe to say no and be done with it. Now, think about it. I don't want to bother the warden. Screw this woman. No, she can go home. But Joe knew maybe that no does conflict with what the higher level needs. So you know what? I'm going to make an effort to say yes, justify my yes. And if I was the administrator, I'm going to be honest with you, regardless of the end result, I love what you said before, James. It's a shame it's not going to be in this book. I'll save it for my updated book when I do it in 5 years. But his decision was a developmental mistake based on, if it was the end result, it wasn't, or whatever. It was a developmental mistake based on what he thought the intent of the policy was. And me as an administrator, if I had an issue with that, I wouldn't even come close to yelling at Joe over it. I would actually admire Joe's initiative right off the bat. I would say, hey, Joe, by the way, let me tell you something first. I appreciate what you did, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to fill him up with all positives, you know, just so he knows, because I have to give him a negative here. But I want to introduce 5 or 6 positives first, so the negative has value, but in a context to grow and not in a context to condescend. And then when I have to introduce the negative, hey, Joe, but by the way, Joe, this person wasn't a visitor. The inmate didn't want it or whatever it is. But please take those initiatives. Just look for these things next time. And Joe goes out there, not afraid, whatever it is, because guess what? I didn't want to be bothered at that time. So Joe made the initiative. Well done. And again, I love that based on the intent of what the policy is. So again, I want one more thing. If you're at the highest level, and I think this is how you make a decision of whether something's a developmental mistake or whether it's just pure negligence. Could the person's discretion, could the choice they have made been in relationship to what the policy wanted? Are we asking ourselves that when we're reading through a debrief on Monday morning? Are we asking ourselves, did what that person what that person committed to, the action they committed to, what does the policy want as the end result? I don't care what policy says specifically right now, A, B, C, D. We already know that he didn't do any of that. We get it. But what is it that policy wants through those letters? Well, policy wants this. Well, what did Joe do? Well, he gave him that. Okay, hold on then. Now let's look at it a little bit differently now. This is a developmental mistake, and we have to be very careful how we approach Joe now because Joe needs discretion as a lieutenant. The last thing I want to do to a lieutenant or the last thing I want to do to a sergeant is to make them feel that they can't make choices. So I have to be, because they won't. And I have to be very careful of how I'm going to address that individual because the end result is if I do it wrong, I got a supervisor that's useless on the floor, and that's my fault. My fault. So let's do some closing thoughts. So I'll go with Butch first. Butch, you have any closing thoughts, sir? Because I know you took a lot of notes. So go all out, balls to the wall.
So I just want to share an intent of policy story with you. I think
I want to hear
it. I have 1,000 of them, but this one here used to get people extremely frustrated. When I told you that.
Wait, hold on, Joe. Hold on, James. Hold on. So you can tell James works in management because he smiled when he said it gets people frustrated. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, James.
Many colleagues and friends and shift commanders that I adored, really. They would get in debates with me what the intent of the policy meant. And if you remember, I was the director of the Policy Development and Compliance Unit for 7 years. So,
wait, Joe, you're muted, James. You got muted. You were director of the policy for 7 years. I went to give you a solo layout and it muted. So you were director.
I was the director of the policy unit. So for 7 years, I wrote many, if not all, my staff wrote and I approved based on some direction given to them. Just about every policy related to security or had something to do with security. And then even the ones that didn't medical, I knew those and studied and understood the changes and what they meant and all that other stuff. So we would discuss or get into a debate over what the intent of the policy meant. And I would let them go on and on and on and before they knew me and then we'd get used to me, but they'd put on these half-hour presentations and I'd say, and that was a good try, but that's not the intent. And they would get frustrated with me about, how do you know that's not the intent? And I used to just, at the end, I would look at them and say, because I'm the one that authored the policy. I know what I intended it to mean. And they would get really, you let me go on for a half hour. Well, I just wanted to see what, if you had anything to offer. But the intent of the policy is knowing policy is one thing, what it says in black and white, but knowing the intent is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's something that we really, hopefully people watch this and then maybe I'll cut a short out of that specific part. But I believe that matters both when it comes to justifying the choice made, but really when you go to employee discretion.
Yep. And like I said, policy does not cover every incident, so there's going to be room for discretion in almost many cases. But there was so many intent of the policy scenarios, especially in transportation. Real quickly, I had one. I remember my dispatchers. They would like anything else. I would always count trips, how many we did a day, how many pre-scheduled trips, how many was my division able to take, and I would measure our performance by I thought we should take just about every pre-scheduled trip. We didn't have the staff to do every pre-scheduled trip in the agency, but we had the staff to do, I think my goal was 93%. We got up to like 94% at one time, but I would start to see the numbers fall a little bit. And then I would have to get on the captains and, it would ring downhill. And then I would start looking at the trips that would kick back and why. But in one case, this correction officer, this team, they had got the message and they were really good. In medical was always a problem, but we worked through those things. The inmate was on oxygen. And right then and there, the officer should have called the supervisor and said, this inmate's going out with an oxygen bottle. And my staff are not prepared for the operation of the oxygen bottle. What if he ran out? Come to find out, they took the guy on oxygen. He ran out. They had to go back to. It was a nightmare. And I said, why do I have two of my people out with an inmate that's on oxygen with an oxygen bottle, who have absolutely no idea how to operate this? That if that inmate needs to go out with on oxygen, and it's detrimental if it stopped working or he ran out, he needs to go out in an ambulance.
Yeah,
Make a long story, but those staff, it wasn't negligence. They just wanted to take the trip because I was in this big push to make sure we're taking trips. But that's an example of it going the other way, and of course they didn't get in trouble, but they did get spoken to about those circumstances that are rather out of the ordinary. You just need to report those, and hopefully the lieutenant would have said, yeah, we're not taking that trip, and ran it by the captain. And I'm sure the captain would have said, we're not going to assume that type of responsibility or a liability for the agency. That the medical people need to make sure that they get appropriate transportation. Now, we'll follow in an ambulance or do the right things. Or I always used to say, put a nurse in the car, then everything would change. They'd start going by the rules left and right. But so that was just another example of people trying to, just do the right thing, and probably need to be spoken to instead of scolded.
Well, yeah, I think part of that really does with common sense decision making too. One of the I'll give you one more. I have a story, if I may share, before we get to Joe, that kind of relates to something at a higher level. So sometimes medical may need an inmate to stay, let's say, inside the infirmary. And, sometimes inmates don't want to do that. But let's say sometimes medical needs that inmate to stay there to be evaluated or whatnot. Maybe they have a heart concern or whatever it is. So now you have medical pushing that inmate has to be in the ambulance, has to be in the infirmary. And then you have, the inmate saying no. And now the inmate's refusing to move. And the question is, are we going to do a cell extraction? Because at this point here, he's supposed to be housed in the infirmary. So it's like common sense to me is, no, we're not going to do a cell extraction. Medical is going to wind up having to tour that area if the evaluation's that big. Because at this point, if I do a cell extraction to save the inmate's life and he has a heart attack, how do I justify that? So with that said, the common sense would be is what would be the end result? So in your case here is the end result is to get that inmate to that location safely. Can we do that with an inmate that has a tank? And I would be quick to say, hey, guys, I don't feel comfortable bringing this inmate on the trip because the end result is if something happens, I can't get that inmate there safely. Because to me, that's the end result of what we want. So having said that, now that's enough for me to go back to my supervisor and say, hey, I have a feeling that if something happens here, I'm not going to be able to complete what that policy wants me to do. But again, it's kind of understand what the end result is, which to me is what is the end result? Getting the inmate point B safe and secured. Hey, Joe, what's your thoughts on closing? I mean, not what's your thoughts on closing. Joe, let me get your – obviously we're ready to close. It's an hour and 30-something minutes. So I don't want your thoughts on closing yet. I want your closing.
I was thinking about the scenario that Bush was talking about, and I was trying not to laugh because it brought me back to a situation where that actually transpired, and it wasn't the fact that the inmate ran out or the officers did anything wrong. There was no vehicle crash, but the officers did have to hit the brakes, and the bottle was in one of those rollers. Looks like a little tripod.
Yeah.
Well, the damn thing slid to the front of the van where it was a mesh cage and knocked the valve off, and this damn oxygen tank became a missile in the back of this damn van, redecorated everything, knocked the cage, and ruined the underwear of all three occupants, both officers and inmates. So it's just one of the things. It's funny afterwards, not so much during, but funny afterwards because you also got to think about the actual safety aspects, especially when it concerns oxygen. And thankfully, after that, transportation said, from here on in, if they require an oxygen bottle, they're either going to go by ambulance, which in Texas we actually actually have our own correctional managed care ambulances, or a shuttle van, with correctional managed care people on it. You got to think about the whole picture, and I understand Butch's take on that, for not scolding the officers, because they just thought they were doing the right thing by taking the initial run and getting this inmate to where he needed to be, medically. It's just one of them things that you don't think about. And unfortunately, after 30 years of experience, if I learned anything, that is, our expanded policies were expanded because of mistakes that we made in the past. Mistakes is what led up to policies being written, or, policies being expanded. Yeah. So you gotta be a critical thinker and actually, kind of think outside the box.
Yeah, guys, my closing thoughts are simple, guys. Discretion is something that is definitely one of the most needed tools as you start to move up, but definitely something you do need, or you begin to cultivate as a front line. Discretionary actions is probably what leads to the growth of policies, and that does require you to go outside your comfort zone. I think the more that you go through these experiences, the more comfortable you get, as long as you're supported by management. You're able to make decisions, and then eventually we all grow together based on the successes or the failures. I mean, that to me is the end result. And again, the excuse is to not make a decision. Really the likelihood versus probability, we talked about all that. Excuses don't move us forward. We're working, like James said before, we're in the people business. Everything about corrections is always going to come down to a decision that has to be made, because I also want to add one more thing in closing too. You don't really want, even though it's corrections, it is what it is, but you don't really want a policy-driven organization, because it also limits your people. So that also could be a downfall as well. Too many policies tend to take the power away from the front line and actually moves it up to people far removed. And that's not what we want to do. We want to actually lessen the policies and procedures and really leave some room for the front line to feel empowered. Just a thought that I'm trying to formulate now, but I think I'm correct. I think that if you have a policy-driven organization, then what's going to wind up happening is the people that are furthest removed are the ones that are really managing things. And I think our effort is to always do what we can to empower the front line, and not be not delegating that how so much, to employ that discretion. And I think that also allows for growth. So again, I get why we have policies and procedures, because most of them are built because of liability, maybe. So we build the policy and procedure just to show the world that we have something documented in case this happens again. But let's not document those things in cement. Let's not document those things with ink. This is really meant for, this is what we have for now. That may be better said. This is what we have for now. But we're always continuing to revisit these policies and see if there's areas that we can grow from. And how do you revisit a policy? You don't go up, you go down. You go down to the people on the tactical side implementing it. You can't go up to revisit a policy from people far removed. You go down to the people that have to implement it, to what can we do better? And I think that's where the growth comes. I mean, I would love, if we had a little bit more discretion. I mean, yes, there are the need for some policies, but be quick also when you're implementing policies and procedures, especially on the failure of one, because what's going to wind up happening is that facility needs to run on momentum, and our job is to kind of keep that momentum going. If you have a failure by one person and you think the best solution is to implement a catch-all policy that winds up screwing around with the people who've been doing their job, the problem is they're going to be less effective, believe it or not, because now they're feeling that you're micromanaging what's it called, an initiative taker, someone that's, they make decisions. So be careful, because the more policies you implement, the more you wind up, believe it or not, making the decision makers on the floor less effective. So again, that's just, again, we want to have an episode about employing discretion, which is great, but the end result of it also is you can't employ discretion in a policy-driven world. So remember that as well, because that's a conflict. And that's one last thing. I wrote a book on inmate manipulation, right? And one of the things I said is I could teach people whatever they could to defend themselves against manipulation, But if you're going to write a policy that can easily be manipulated, then the problem is everything I teach them about manipulation won't matter. Because the policies, it's not the inmate that's the problem. It's the fucking policies. And I said fucking as an adjective to color the importance of what I said. So as always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.